Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar series. I'm your host, Brad Ken, and we're so excited to bring you today's presentation. We want to thank you for including us in your busy plans today, especially with the first round of the NFL draft, and of course, Avengers Endgame premiering tonight. Oh my gosh, we're so excited. It's an honor to be associated with those juggernauts. Before we begin, however, we wanted to let you in on an update about Vertical Measures since our last webinar. Much like the famous musician Prince, we are the agency formerly known as Vertical Measures. Now you can refer to us proudly as Vertical Measures, an Investis digital company. We are so excited about this acquisition. You can read more about it in the chat tab. Zach's going to drop a link for you now. What this means is that Vertical Measures, you can still find our high quality content that you guys love. We're still going to host webinars at the same spot. You will still get updates through our newsletter throughout the rest of the year, and we'll be providing updates as we continue. So moving on, today's webinar is titled The Customer's Journey, How an Owned Audience Can Transform Your Brand, and will be presented by our digital strategist, Blake Pappas. Blake might be best referred to as a jack of all trades, but honestly, he's a master of many. He taps into a diverse content marketing background to help companies, both big and small, reach their digital marketing goals. He truly enjoys partnering with companies and becoming ingrained in their business. Content marketing is incredibly challenging to do and do it well, and no one understands this concept more than Blake. I'm also proud that Blake and I co-authored the latest book of the same name, The Customer Journey, along with a few other VMers this year. You can also find a link for that free download in the chat tab as well. So before Blake takes you on this customer journey, I have a few notes to go over. This presentation will be available online tomorrow at verticalmeasures.com/webinars. We'll also shoot you an email tomorrow morning with that link. If you have any questions, shoot it over to us in the questions tab anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll try to run it by Blake during the Q&A. Make sure you download our free, full-color, critically acclaimed book, The Customer Journey, at vert.ms/customer-journey. It's a $40 value on Amazon that we're giving away for free, so go ahead and grab it while you can. And finally, we know your time is extremely valuable, but if you have a minute or two after the webinar, we ask that you fill out our quick 5-question multiple choice survey. It really helps us when it comes to planning out future webinar topics and guests. So that's it from me. Everyone, please welcome Blake.
All right, thank you, Brad. I really appreciate that. I'm excited to chat with you all today about the customer journey. It's something that really gets tossed around and I feel like misconstrued and kind of misunderstood as to why it's so important in today's digital age. So today, I'm going to walk you through what the customer journey really is in the digital landscape, why it's so important, some examples of the tactics that we want to incorporate throughout each stage, and also we're going to really dive in and talk about and explain what an owned audience is. It's in the title, How an Owned Audience Can Transform Your Brand, but most people don't know what that means. So we're going to really dive into a lot of these topics. So hopefully you can start owning your customer journey with your content strategy for your brand. All right. So like I said, what is an owned audience anyway? That's something that I know is probably a newer term to most people out there. It's one that we've really started to embrace over the past couple of years. And so let's dive into what this means before we start jumping ahead to the customer journey and all of the marketing lingo. Let's talk about how these different, how an owned audience and how the different tiers work. So I don't know if you know this, but there are 3 different tiers to your audience. It's not just everyone that follows you or interacts with you. It really can be categorized and broken down into these 3 tiers. So the largest tier is going to be short term, and then it's going to funnel people down to the non-owned and then the owned. So let's walk through what those are. The first one is tier 3. So this is anyone who's basically been to your website at some point in time. You know nothing about them, you have very little information, and you really don't have a direct pathway to communicate with them. So at this point, you're kind of stuck with trying to retarget them through paid, using pixels on your website to hopefully reach out to them again and try to get your message in front of them again, but it's no guarantee that it's going to work, and it's a very short-term solution. So then once maybe you've helped people move further along down the funnel, They might become, let's say, a social media follower or a podcast subscriber or follow your YouTube channel. That's still not an owned audience in our definition of the word. So really the reason for this is because you don't own those social media platforms. You don't typically own the podcast platform that you're using. So think of it that way. You might say, well, we have 100,000 Facebook followers. That's still not truly owning your audience, and you can't always reach out to them at any given point in time and deliver your message that you want to. So, and just think about it this way, if Facebook were to go away tomorrow, what would happen to all of that data and all that contact information that you've worked so hard to gain for all of your followers and your audience? So it could go away at any time, so you don't truly own that audience. So that's why we really want to stress and emphasize the importance of funneling everyone into that tier one, that owned audience category, which is really having a direct pathway to communicate your marketing messages with them at any time that you choose. So someone like an email subscriber, a customer, it might even be someone who, if you have an app for your company, a way that you can send notifications and messages to them directly. You don't have to rely on social media and paid and all of these other channels to try to get in front of them again. You can literally send your message directly to them at any time. And so this is the gold solution. This is what we're trying to aim towards and get everyone funneled down to. But you got to start out with that broader audience. You got to start out with people that have maybe visited your website once and funnel them along the way. So as we start to talk about all of these tactics in the customer journey today, I just wanted to get this out of the way and explain, when we say owned audience, this is what we mean, and this is what we're striving for. All right. So also, before we get too far down the funnel, if you will, the other thing I want to get out of the way is, what is the definition of content marketing? I know we all hear it and we see it and we think we know what it means, but I just always like to kind of start out with this baseline so that you have hopefully a firm understanding of how we define it. And this image is actually pulled directly from the lobby of our building because we embrace this concept every day. So content marketing is really the art of providing relevant, useful information to your customers without selling or interrupting them. Instead of pitching your products and services, you're just delivering information that makes them more informed before they buy. You're literally trying to help them and not just talk about yourself, me, all the time. All right, with that being said, let's move on. So how has the customer journey really evolved and changed over the years? And how has that affected sales? So let's kind of look back at the way that the old sales mentality and the old customer journey used to work to understand how it's evolved. So for some of you, and I can attest to this, at least with my parents, the way that the old customer journey used to work, I can compare it to purchasing a car. So back maybe in the 90s and even early 2000s, what was it like to purchase a car? What was that process like? You typically had to maybe receive a stimulus, see that marketing came in during the awareness stage. You might have seen a billboard, a TV ad, a magazine article, something like that, but you still didn't know much about that particular car or vehicle. And so from there, to get the information you need to make that purchasing decision, you'd have to go into obviously the company's building or their lot and talk to someone, talk to a salesperson, and they would help funnel you down from your awareness, help you give you all of those factors to consider, and then ultimately make that purchasing decision, and then hopefully turn you into an advocate for that company someday. And that's that old way that people just don't really like anymore. We hate dealing with salespeople for the most part. We try to avoid them. Now we do all of our research online. So that's how we used to buy things. We used to have to go into a store, deal with kind of a hassle of a salesperson trying to convince us and talk us into something we don't necessarily need or want. And so we've strayed away from that. Let's fast forward to today. Now we have things like Carvana out there where I can literally buy and research and educate myself and then purchase that car that I want without ever having to talk to a salesperson, and it's delivered to my front door. Or in some cases, if you really want to, you can go down by yourself and buy it out of their cool car vending machine. You know, it's very amazing the way technology continues to advance and affect the way that the customer journey works. So this is the new way that really we're reaching our audience and trying to speak with them. It's no longer, well, we can, blast out a bunch of radio ads and billboards and things like that, and then people will be forced to come in and talk to us and our sales team can take it from there. Really, marketing is the one that's facilitating this entire conversation. They're generating that awareness online. You can go out and present your message and your products and your brand to your audience from that awareness stage, and then also continue to nurture them and provide it during the consideration stage, because at that point, your audience has already educated themselves almost the entire way. And then once they're ready to make that purchasing decision, then they'll actually reach out to your company. They're going to avoid that face-to-face interaction at all costs until they absolutely have to. So keep that in mind. Do you have the content to help nurture them along to make that purchasing decision with you? And kind of what I was alluding to is the customer is 57% of the way through their journey before they even talk with any salesperson. So keep that in mind. Do you have all the information that they need and that's educating them before they decide to reach out? Because if not, they've already made up their mind as to which company or which brand they're going to go with, because they had the information out there. And 60% of that journey is completed through digital channels. I know this really doesn't come as a shock or a surprise to most of you, but think about when you're wanting to know more about a new product or a new service, or you have a question or a need, where do you go to help address that and find out about that? We all go to Google, we all go online, we all start doing research through various means and methods, but most of that journey is completed through digital channels. There's so much information out there at our fingertips that that's really where we need to be focusing our efforts to reach our audience. And so again, why focus on the customer journey? Why is this important? Why can't we just create a bunch of information and have it live out there? Because I'll send out this presentation obviously after the webinar, but really the companies, as you can see, the green bars in this slide are all of the companies that have mapped their customer journey. They have understood and addressed each stage of their audience's journey and provided that information to them. The companies that don't are the ones in dark blue that are obviously not exceeding expectations or meeting up to the same level as those who took the time to really address all of those needs. And that affects everything from your return on your marketing investment to referrals to your sales cycle, upsell opportunities. Those companies that are doing it right and actually mapping out all the content and reaching out to their audience throughout each stage of their journey are the ones that are seeing the best results. So what is the customer journey? What does that really mean? It takes on very, very different names and terminology. The buyer's journey, the customer journey, sales funnel, buyer's sales, customer journey funnel, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, it's really all the steps a customer takes to solve their problem. And let's face it, they're going to do that with or without you. So I don't know about you, I would want to be the one that's really facilitating that conversation and providing and guiding the conversation of information that they need to reach out and make that decision with me and my brand. And 68% of B2B organizations haven't even defined the stages in their sales funnel. So how are you going to know what content you're supposed to be creating if you don't even understand your audience and what they're going through at each stage of their journey and their process to making that purchasing decision? So that's really step one, is to go back and understand what those stages are and define those before you start trying to guess and create content and understand where it goes. So think about, what does your journey look like? This is probably a very typical, really summed down version where, are you addressing at the awareness stage what inquiries, questions people are having, very top of mind, top of funnel. They're not talking about your brand or your product or your service yet. They just have a need or a question that they're trying to address. And then do you have, maybe a comparison stage where now they've heard of you or they've heard of what you're offering, but they want to know, maybe are there other solutions or other types out there that can address their need? They're looking for that comparison content. And then all the way down to that purchasing decision. What are the final few, tidbits of information they need to feel comfortable and confident to make that final purchasing decision? And then last but not least is maybe you have an installation or an implementation phase, or what do they do with this product or service? What does that last step of their journey look like? So this is just a high level summarized version, but what does yours look like? I mean, it could be something, very complex, has a lot of different stages like this one, where you need to, maybe the sales cycle is very long for them. Maybe their journey lasts a year before they make a purchasing decision. And so do you have the content that addresses those needs at each stage of the way, and you understand what each of those stages look like for your audience? And then you also want to understand how these channels can really meet and address your audience's needs at each stage of their journey as well. So you know how to target them and how to provide that information accordingly. So as you can see in this slide here, paid and earned social and social media tactics, that's really how you can try to address them, what their needs are, and reach out and put your message in front of them. And then as they start to do their research, they've maybe heard of you and experienced your brand now, then you can start to nurture them along with some of that own content, intermediaries, lead nurture, and understand which of these channels are best suited for each stage of their journey. So make sure that you have content that you can serve up through all of these different channels to make sure that they don't drop off and forget about you or go find that information elsewhere. So let's kind of dive in now. After we've kind of learned and thought about what our customer journey might look like. So I'm sure some of you are still wondering, like, what does this look like in an example? Like, show me and illustrate from start to finish how you would target someone in their customer journey and provide that information at each step along the way to address their needs. I'm glad you asked. So let's walk through this example of higher education, just to give you an example of her sales cycle. So let's meet Sophia. What we know about her, because we've defined our audience and we've defined this persona and understand her pretty well. We know she's probably a mid-level marketer already. She's a career mover. She's looking to progress. She loves her job, but maybe ready for something else at this stage in her life. And she's a millennial. So a lot of this information tells us a lot about her and how we can try to best reach her in her times of need and what content along the way she's looking for. And last but not least, we know she's a sales avoider. So kind of like what we alluded to earlier with the old car sales mentality, people, especially millennials, are starting to avoid, reaching out to a salesperson and have maybe, try to talk you into something you don't want, and then maybe emailing you 80,000 times afterwards to keep bugging you about making that purchasing decision. She wants to educate herself before she really makes that final decision to purchase. So this is important to understand so we can try to best cater to her needs along the way. So let's say she receives that initial awareness. She's not even going, she doesn't realize that she has a need to go back to school yet. But we're a higher education university. We made up this fictional university called Coronado. So maybe she sees, a competitor. She sees a billboard saying, "Hey, we're Magellan University. Check out our online MBA programs and traditional ones." That's true awareness content that she's receiving because she didn't even know she had a question or a need yet. It's generating that awareness and offering something that she didn't even know she wanted yet. But then she starts to think about it, that kind of plants that seed in her head, and she starts to think about, what do I really want to do with my career? Maybe I am interested in going back to school and progressing. And then she sees some piece of content from an influencer. So maybe someone on LinkedIn has something about, advanced marketing degrees. What are your options? She comes across this piece of content on LinkedIn and it speaks to her. It appeals to where she's at in her journey, and she's curious, so she clicks on it. But at the end of this piece of content, she reads it, it just really is just about the university programs and course options. And she still has a lot of questions, and they don't have the content on their site to help address and meet all of her needs. So this is what we call a content gap. So it's really hard to understand and expect someone to jump from awareness, maybe just realizing they might have a need and an interest in this product or service, to make that decision. There's a lot of steps, and oftentimes there's many steps in between these two stages to jump from realizing they have a question or a need to making a decision. What are those steps along the way? So we call that a content gap. It's understanding what factors does she need to consider, what things does she need to know and experience first before she makes that purchasing decision. So in this case, she's going to drop out of their funnel because they don't have the information on their website to address all of her needs. So she's going to go back to Google and start asking questions. What is the best online MBA in marketing? I saw a billboard and I've seen some information from Magellan University, but now I still have more questions. They didn't really address and meet my needs throughout my journey. So I'm going back to Google and seeing what's out there. So this is where we want to make sure that we have the content that's optimized and showing up at the top of the search results that will hopefully now bring Sophia into our funnel, into our customer journey. And we do that through many different ways. So we're going to go through this a little bit throughout today's webinar, but it really all boils down to what is the best way to capture her information. And through that hub and spoke model that we really embrace and utilize, it's having that lead gen piece of content. Is it a quiz? Is it an ebook? Whatever it is that's usually behind a gate that we can get her email address from, and then have all of these spokes to help support it. It's not going to just do all the work and the heavy lifting by itself. We need to plant as many seeds out there and reach people in a variety of ways that eventually target them and bring them back to our hub, and bring them back to really the ultimate goal is to get their email address, their contact info, so that we can continue to nurture them and provide them information ongoing. So get them down to that tier 1 owned audience like we talked about. So she takes this quiz. She after she goes to our page and realizes, oh, I'm interested in, we have a quiz. We thank her for taking our shortest self-assessment quiz. So, to see how you scored and see what our recommendations are for you and your career, all you have to do is provide us your name and email, and we'll send you your results. And at this point, this is a fair ask for her because we're not being too invasive. We're not asking for her phone number and her home address and all of this other really personal information. We just want your name and email address, and we'll send this information. That's an appropriate ask at this stage in her journey. So keep that in mind. You don't want to ask for too much information up front because the ask isn't going to outweigh what they're getting in return. But as of right now, this is a pretty fair and easy to ask for trade. So once we get that information and she's given us her email address, we've sent her her results, now we can continue to nurture her along her way. We know what she's interested in. We know that she's looking at an MBA in marketing and has a lot of questions. So let's start to address those questions. So maybe the next email we send her is an MBA in marketing really worth it? That seems like a really relevant piece of content at her stage in her journey that she's probably asking herself. She's already heard of what an MBA is, but now she's wondering, what's the next question that I have? Is it really worth it? Is all of the time and money and effort that I'm going to put into this, is it really going to be worth it? And so once she goes to that blog post, that's a piece of content that she's really interested in. We'll then have maybe a link or send her to another piece of content that says, hey, a day in the life of a CMO. Now that you wonder and understand if it's really worth it, let's take you through what the outcome of this degree program might be. So let's go through a day in the life of a CMO. And then from there, if she's ready, we have that form ready and available. If she wants to learn more and get more specific information and help her make that decision stage, then we have it right there. She can provide her email and name and job title, and then how soon she wants to go back to school if she wants to. So from this stage, we also would like to retarget her and serve her up maybe through social media. Not sure if you should go back to school. Well, here's some more answers to your questions. Maybe take our quiz and see if this is still the right decision for you. We don't just stop there and expect maybe one piece of content is going to address all of her needs and all of her questions. Let's continue to provide her as many options and help as possible to make her feel comfortable during this decision. And at this stage, we're going to ask, things like, what campus are you maybe interested in? How did you hear about us? We're going to learn more about her as we nurture her along throughout this journey. And then ultimately, she's gone through and interacted with this content. She's provided some of her personal information. She's submitted results. She's interacted with our emails and our blog posts and done a lot of things that now we know a lot about Sophia. And so at this point, we might want to still provide her help and really what can help her reach that ultimate decision. We can do that through sometimes organic and paid social. We can retarget her through social media, maybe provide testimonials of other people that have gone through this similar program and the results that they've seen and how happy they are about it. And then even provide one-to-one chat options. Hey, connect now with a current alumni or someone who's in the program, things like that. Or connect with someone from the school and ask questions about that. Even if she's not ready for it, we're still providing that option if that is what is going to meet her needs at this specific stage. And then, like we said, sometimes that tipping scale is having that decision level content. She's educated herself. She feels very confident about pursuing this degree program. She knows what it'll help her do in her life. But we still want to know before we make that big investment, is it worth it? So having some of those testimonials and positive content from people who have gone through her experience is going to speak volumes to her and really help her along her way. So from there, we've given her all the information from awareness to consideration to ultimately making that decision. And now she's ready to actually reach out to admissions and contact them and request more information. But we don't just stop there, right? Like we've gotten her now to enroll as a student and reach out to the university. Our journey's over. Unfortunately not. We feel like there's so much more value and so much more to still get out of Sophia that can help you from an online future marketing perspective. So from there, after she's been enrolled with her program and enrolled in an MBA, we want to turn her into an evangelist. We want to continue to receive helpful messages and potentially upsell opportunities. Maybe she's so happy with her experience, she'd be willing to film a really short, quick testimonial video, or maybe submit a quote to us that we can then use to help provide that information to new prospective students in the future, similar to the way that we had a testimonial for her. So how do we tie this all together? I know, how did we come up with all of this content? How did we know to serve it to her in all of these different formats and each stage of the way? That's a really great question. Because honestly, 62% of the companies who are most successful in digital marketing have a documented strategy. That's really first and foremost where it all comes down to. Are these ideas just living in your head? Or have you really fleshed out every single step of the way and how you're going to achieve these goals? So let's walk through what your strategy looks like. Make sure you're addressing these factors so that you can speak to someone like Sophia throughout her customer journey and reach her along that way to ultimately choosing to go with your brand compared to all of your competitors. We believe there's definitely a way to have maybe not enough strategy. You're just kind of shooting from the hip. You don't really have a plan. You're just kind of posting random things on social. You're posting random things on your blog, not really seeing those results and traction and wondering why. And then it is possible to have too much strategy. And we've seen in some cases where companies and clients, they have so much strategy, they've defined so many one-off tiny little elements, and it's such a robust, maybe thick book of a document that no one opens it. No one actually utilizes this strategy because it's too overwhelming. It's not simplified. It's not easy to reference and consume. So there is definitely somewhere a happy middle ground that we're going to try to help walk through and see if this could be something that you can achieve as well. So what makes up what we consider the basic elements of a digital strategy? Well, it starts out with those foundational ones. Have you really defined your business goals? Do you know who your audience is? What does a current state analysis look like in your industry? What are your competitors doing? And then honestly, what are those strategic initiatives you're going to do to achieve those goals that you're trying to pursue for your business? And then there's the tactical considerations. What exactly are you going to create to help achieve all of these different aspects of your strategy? Where is this information going to live? Where is this content going to be lived and shared? Who will produce the content? That's another thing. We like the idea of creating all this content, but at the end of the day, who's actually going to do it? And then governance. This is one of the biggest ones after working with many different companies that can get really messy really quickly once your content strategy gets going, because who's going to be responsible for reviewing things, approving, preventing those bottlenecks from happening? Governance is going to hopefully alleviate and solve a lot of those problems to keep things well organized. So let's start out with business goals. This seems rather obvious, but let's first really think about and have an honest conversation. What are your business goals currently? What are you trying to achieve? And how can content marketing help? We like to think of it as maybe the silver bullet that can do everything, but what specifically do you want it to help you do? And how can it help achieve your business goals? You need to really answer those questions first. And what are your goals? Are they hard goals? Are they very specific and measurable? Like, we want to increase leads by 10% this quarter, or we want to increase revenue by 5% at the end of the year. Those are specific and measurable goals. Or they may be more soft goals that you want to achieve that are a little bit more lofty and aspirational. And what I mean by that is, do we want to be a thought leader in our industry, or do we want to have an authoritative voice on this specific topic? Those are things that are really difficult to measure, but it's something you kind of, it has a look and a feel, and it's something that you'll know if you've accomplished this goal. So really define those. What are your hard and soft goals you're trying to accomplish from a business standpoint? Let's also think about, what are your audience's needs? Because that's really what this boils down to. And answer these questions. Who is your audience? Do you really know that? I've worked with companies where I ask them, who is their target customer? Who is their primary audience? And sometimes they don't really know. They just think they're trying to reach everyone. Where do they search? This is another important part. Where do they go for information? When they have questions and needs, where are they going? What are they searching? What are their problems? Do you have any idea, before they reach out to you and decide to utilize your products or services, what problems are they having that have caused them to come and reach out at that point? And how can you help address those before it gets to that stage? What questions do they have? Exactly. What are they asking about your industry? What are they asking about that's anything semi-related to your products and services? And then where do they consume this content? So think about this too from a standpoint, if you have a very young audience and you're trying to reach out to them, maybe certain social channels aren't the best fit, or vice versa. If you're trying to reach maybe an older demographic who's in their 40s and 50s, I don't know if creating a lot of content for Snapchat is going to be the best fit, because that's not where your audience is consuming their content. Or maybe they don't like to consume ebooks, but they really like blog posts. So which one are you creating to help address and answer your specific audience's needs? Think about that. Where are they consuming this content, and how do they like to consume it? And then think about, what do you want them to do next? Sounds really obvious, but have a goal. Don't just post this content. It sounds great. It might answer one of their questions, but then what else do you want them to do? What do you want to help them accomplish through your content? And then give them a next step to do. What is the next point in that process? Okay, great. You've educated them on this particular topic. Now check out our ebook that dives deeper into this topic. And then now you can get their email address and hopefully continue to nurture them and address more questions that they have. And then map everything that you decide to do back to these goals. So if you think that doing a hub and spoke or fixing your SEO issues are really the primary goals that you want to achieve, tie those back to, if you're trying to really increase traffic and leads, are these initiatives going to influence and affect that directly? Because if not, then that's not really something that makes a whole lot of sense to be spending your time and effort and money doing. So if you spend a lot of time in email automation, but realize, wow, that's not really increasing traffic, that's not really achieving the goal that you're wanting to. So map all of these strategic initiatives back to each stage of your business goals and what you're trying to influence, as well as map them to your audience. So at each stage of the way, do these tactics and do these pieces of content speak to them at each stage of their journey? And make sure that you don't have those gaps. So if you're only creating, let's say, awareness content on social media, but you have nothing to help fill these gaps on consideration and decision, then they're going to drop out of your journey. They're going to drop out of your funnel and go to someone else's site or someone else's channels that can help address those needs at that particular point in their journey. But you have to have the content to do all this at each stage, whether it's for paid, it's social, email, organic. All of this really boils down to having the content that will speak to them and address those questions and problems they're having at each stage of their journey. So content marketing is an asset, it's not an expense. So we get pushback all the time that, oh, this blog post is really expensive, or, oh, it's so hard and difficult and expensive to create an ebook. But think about how much over time that's going to bring you leads and bring you traffic and bring you hopefully potentially sales. Honestly, content marketing generates 3 times the amount of leads as outbound marketing and costs 62% less. Because once you've done that upfront cost of creating it and publishing it and promoting it, it can then really start to generate traction and bring leads and traffic over time that will more than justify the startup cost for it. But we need a lot of ideas. And so at Vertical Measures, we believe in kind of what we like to jokingly say is content Moneyball. So for those of you that aren't really familiar with the story of Moneyball, it's basically acknowledging and understanding in the game of life and in the game of business, we're not all the New York Yankees. We all don't have that really high budget and just an endless supply of money to pour into marketing. We need to get creative, and it's hard to compete with some of the bigger brands out there. So we need to really find all of those opportunities and create as much content as possible. So like I said, most of us aren't the New York Yankees. We have to play small ball. We have to be really efficient with our time and our money and really go for those hits. Go for those consistent questions and problems and needs that our audience is having and write content around that. And not just a couple topics a year, you need to be hammering out as much as you possibly can without sacrificing quality. Because at the end of the day, it's tough to really predict what is going to be a viral success or what's going to generate thousands and thousands of leads or traffic. We can't always predict how that's going to really resonate with your audience and with the search engine results pages in Google. So start creating a lot of ideas. Start getting those hits. You know, if 1 out of every 4 blog posts is a mild success, great, continue to create more. And every now and then you're going to find some breakthrough and generate a really big success and generate a lot of traffic for you. But in order to play this content Moneyball, like I said, you can't have just a couple of ideas. You need to have honestly hundreds and start from there. Don't feel overwhelmed, but prioritize those hundreds of ideas and start working your way down the list to help reach your audience. And we also jokingly say, I wrote you every day for a year. For any of you notebook fans out there, I know it's probably not realistic to create a completely new organic piece of content every day for a year, but maintaining that consistency is really the point we're trying to hammer home here is don't just publish, you know, 1 day here, skip a month, take a month off, then publish for a couple of days, then take another few months off. Google likes to see that consistency, and so does your audience. So continue to provide that value as frequently and consistently as possible. And then make sure you're answering these questions first. So who is your audience? So in order to set up this foundation, you want to know who is your audience? What is going to be different a year from now? What results are you anticipating being different from now? And what goals are you trying to hit? And then honestly, where are you going to publish all this content that makes the most sense and especially fits your audience's needs? And then why are you creating this content? You need to really address and answer these, the who, what, when, where, why, because otherwise you're just taking a shot in the dark and your content really isn't going to be as effective as you thought. So how do you come up with an endless stream of these ideas? I know that's one of the biggest questions and pain points we have is, okay, great, I want to create a lot of content, but how do I know what to create? Ask your staff. Start there. Start asking your staff, hey guys, sales team, customer service, anyone, even client facing in any aspect. And then honestly, even internal people that have heard things and witnessed and experienced parts of your business, start asking them, what are the most common questions we get? What are those pain points that we seem to keep experiencing? Or what are those most frequently asked questions that people are always talking about? Start there, get those questions, document them. And then use that in your ideation and start creating content that people want. If people are always asking that, chances are they're looking for it online too. So let's say price, cost. I know it's kind of scary to talk about this, but that's something that everyone is asking about. That's usually one of the first questions that we ask online is, okay, I'm interested in this product or service, but you know, how much does it cost? Or what is the price involved? And you can address that through your content and go into the factors that really influence cost. Don't be afraid to talk about problems and issues, because you want to control that narrative. You want to talk about and help your audience overcome maybe the problems and issues they might experience with your product or service. So think about it in this sense is, you know, if Apple were to create a piece of content that said how to solve your battery life issues, that's something that's talking about their product and their product that they offer. And it's a problem that people have. They're constantly complaining about my phone's always dead or it doesn't stay charged for very long. So let's create a piece of content. Let's not shy away from that. Let's talk about, hey, here's how you can get better battery life out of our product. We care about you, we want to help you, and we appreciate you buying our product. Now here's how to utilize it even better. Don't be afraid to address those problems and issues. As well as versus and comparisons. So this is a little bit more of that consideration level content, but you know, comparing maybe one product and solution to another. and maybe different brands and different companies, or just different types of the exact same solution, help educate your audience, break it down for them so that they know what the real differences are and can make that decision for themselves. Do you have reviews? Do you have product reviews, or maybe company reviews, positive testimonials and reviews on your site? Do you review maybe a new product that just came out and talk about all the pros and cons of it? And this is one of the easiest ones and the most frequent ones, is best and top of. Are you creating a best of list, a top list? That's also how we interact with search. We ask those questions. What are the best products in this area? What are the top solutions for this problem I'm experiencing? As well as resource pages. So these are going to be a little bit more evergreen. These are going to be topics and pieces of content that are relevant for years and years to come, but they're probably the most frequently asked questions that your audience is having. Do you have maybe fully built out resource pages on your site to address those main core questions that your audience is having? So make sure you're answering all of these questions that people are having and addressing them. And it's really easy to ideate. It might seem like a big overwhelming task at first, but have a whiteboard session. Pull people into a room for an hour. Just have people go crazy. Start writing ideas up on the board, and you'd be surprised at some of the unique ideas that are living in people's heads that they don't really come out and say and talk about. Make it easy for them to share it as well. So maybe if you don't want to hold a meeting and have a whiteboard session, maybe just have a whiteboard or an area in the office where if people have an idea about paid media or CRO or content, to come up and write it on a sticky note, paste it up there, and then your marketing team can figure out how to utilize those ideas and turn them into a piece of content if they feel like it's a good fit. Also go to Google Suggest. Google is literally going to tell you what people are frequently searching for. So utilize that to your advantage. Start to type in maybe a question or a phrase that you feel like your audience is likely to have, and then start to see what keywords it starts to fill in, because that's what people are searching for, and then see the results and see how crowded it is. See it also from a paid and an organic perspective. What kind of content is being served up on these results? And is there an opportunity for you to do it better and maybe climb ahead of them in the rankings? And see how they're talking about your industry and your products or services. And if you don't like what's maybe appearing at that first dropdown, start to look at related. And people also ask in these answer boxes, you know, searches related to best online marketing master's degrees. They might start to spark some ideas that you never would have thought of before, but you got to spend the time and start to branch out and look at these types of ideas that exist all over Google if you just spend the time. I'm not going to go too in depth into all of these different keyword tools out there, but don't feel like you have to utilize all of them. Just start out with one that you feel comfortable with. I personally love to use Moz Keyword Planner. It gives you a lot of different variations and ideas for keyword phrases out there. Keywordtool.io is a great one as well. It has a free version and a paid version. AnswerThePublic.com, kind of a weird guy on that front homepage. Don't be too scared off by him, but it does break down keyword searches by questions, prepositions, comparisons, alphabeticals. It breaks it down into a really nice, easy to digest way so that you can come up with ideas of kind of who, what, when, where, and why related to a specific topic. YouTube, also another Google entity, is a wealth of information. So if you're thinking about creating video content, but you want to know, is your audience even remotely interested in this, or are people searching for this topic, start to type it into YouTube and see how they finish your search and see what people are frequently looking at. And I want to say that YouTube and video content is especially helpful for how-to type of video content. People are wanting to know not necessarily even how to use a product or service, which they are, but you know, how to best, you know, how to hire a keynote speaker, how to do like a process, or how to install maybe a water filter system in my house. That's one that I've been looking at recently. Lots of how-tos and talk through that process. Even if you're not physically doing it, people like to consume video content. They like to walk through those steps in a nice visual way. So make sure you have content that really speaks to that. When it comes to optimization and showing up in those search results pages, so when Sophia goes back to search and starts looking for best online MBA programs, make sure that it's optimized for search. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see companies make in their content is they try to be witty, they try to be funny and you know, just really quirky with their content. But at the end of the day, Google doesn't laugh. They don't understand these puns and jokes that you're trying to make with your headlines, and that's not the way that people search either. So in this example, you can see it's a magazine article that's called "The Beast Within." What does that mean? Would you ever search for that phrase online? But if you would have known, oh, it's actually a video of cute animals and cats, that's something that a normal person would actually search for. So keep it really simple. Keep it basic as to how you would search online, and you're probably on the right track for a good optimized headline. Because really that holy grail is to appease Google, make it simple for them to understand what your content is about, and then also appease your audience and address a simple question and need that they're having. And kind of that happy middle ground is making it interesting for the reader, but also easy for Google to understand. It's a fine line and a balancing act, but it is possible to do both. And when you do, that's typically when you see the best results. So let's also create, like I said, create those headlines that get found. Don't be afraid to just address really basic, that might seem a little boring questions, but that's what we're asking. So if I'm looking at maybe considering getting solar panels installed into my house, I don't want some of those funny pun, headlines. I want to ask questions like, how much does solar cost? How much can I save with solar? Can I finance it? And then solar versus electric, what are the pros and cons? These are some basic questions that an average user is going to look up and want to know about. And do you have the content that addresses each of these basic needs? Before you start getting really creative and really, really crazy with it, let's address these first. And honestly, the organizations that I see that anticipate and answer their audience's questions effectively and thoroughly and really help them accomplish the goal that they're trying to do online are the ones that are winning. The ones that are trying to be funny or just provide as minimal information as possible, they're the ones that are struggling to see traction with their content. So let's also walk through what types of content as far as formats. So you know maybe some of the topics and ideas, but what's going to be the best? That's a question I get all the time is, what are the best types of content to create for each stage of this customer journey? So typically at awareness, it's going to be a nice bite-sized piece of information that people want to consume because they're not really invested. They're not bought in yet to what this topic is. So something like an article, a video, social media post, you can hopefully try to reach them through that awareness stage is going to be a good fit. I don't want to sit down and read a full 10-page essay when I've just learned about your industry or just learned about your topic for the first time. And then as you work your way down at the consideration stage, this is when I'm a little bit more educated. I'm a little bit more bought in as to what you're talking about and what you're trying to educate me on. So maybe you want to have an ebook that can appeal to the consideration stage. Things like webinars, newsletters, people who are now familiar with your brand and your topics, they want a little bit more, something beyond that surface level article, provide a little bit more wealth of information. And in these cases, that's where you can get that email address and contact information in exchange for this more meaty, valuable piece of content. And then work your way down to the decision content. This is something that most companies seem to have quite a bit of because, let's face it, we love to talk about ourselves and how great we are. But at the end of the day, you need to have some effective decision content that really goes into pricing, not just, hey, here's the price, but explaining like what goes into this pricing, what you get for it, all of the factors, comparisons, demos, case studies. If I make it to your product page or your service page, do you have enough information that's really convincing and compelling to make me want to actually make that decision with you? And then advocacy. Don't forget about this. This is that last step that we often overlook because we're so excited to make the sale or make the transaction, but you have something that's going to encourage and instill trust for future customers and future audience, videos, testimonials, things that are advocating for your brand and earning those trust signals. And don't let the industry you're in be an excuse to not really fully invest and create content. We get people all the time that say, well, I work in insurance or I work for a luggage retailer. That's not really an exciting industry to write content about and talk about. But you got to be creative. Think about when it comes to automotive insurance, people want car maintenance tips. That's totally relevant to your audience and your industry. Or if you're a luggage retailer, country-specific travel guides. Hey, that's very applicable to luggage and what's the best luggage you're going to need. So think of these examples and how you can apply them to your industry, because your audience does have an interest. Everyone has an audience, and everyone has questions and needs that need to be met. So really, at the end of the day, ask yourself, if you're wondering, is this a good piece of content to create for my specific audience throughout their journey? Would my audience actually search for that? This sounds like a really obvious question, but you would be surprised. Would anyone at your company search for that, but would your audience actually search for that? What is the specific purpose of this piece of content? Besides, it sounds good to create, but what is this helping your audience do? What is the end result you're hoping for from this piece of content, and how does it contribute to a business goal? Is it educational? Is it just a lot of fluff and information that really doesn't help someone solve a need or fully understand the point you're trying to make and talk about? Educate your audience. They have so many questions and concerns throughout their journey. Make sure every piece is educational in some way. And is it easy to read? Now, I don't mean is it written in a third grade reading level. What I mean is it chunked up? Is it easy to consume? Is it small bite-sized paragraphs? Does it have maybe images or video elements, bullet points, numbers, things that make it so I'm not just looking at a huge wall of text. It's something that online we want information bite-sized and quick to consume. So is your content easy to read? Is it visually appealing for someone when they get there that they can find what they're looking for? And last but not least, would I read and enjoy it? That's another hard question to ask. If you go back and read all of the content that you've been creating on your site, especially your blog, do you actually enjoy reading it? Because if you don't, I can almost guarantee your audience isn't going to enjoy reading it either. So ask yourself these questions before you take the time to publish your content. And really tie everything back. Plan out your hub and spoke model. What is going to be the end goal? What is your lead aggregator? What is that piece of content that people want and find so valuable to get that they're going to provide their contact information to get it? And then how are you going to support that piece of information? Are you going to have case studies, emails, articles, press releases? What makes the most sense for this specific hub topic and audience you're trying to reach, and map that out. So this might be what your content timeline looks like. In month 1, we're going to create this specific ebook supported by however many blog posts you feel is going to be effective and you're physically capable of creating. Month 2, let's plan out this gated checklist, video, and XYZ. Plan out your content timeline as thoroughly and effectively as possible so that you're not just kind of, shooting from the hip month to month and then falling behind. You're setting deadlines for yourself and you're setting a timeline. And really think about how much content do you need? And that's another odd question to think about as well, because I know we think, oh, the more the merrier. But really, this is a rough guideline. I'm not going to say this applies to every business or every company out there. But typically, the awareness is going to be the largest pool of people to pull from. So a lot of your content, maybe even 50%, should be focusing on those awareness, top of funnel questions that aren't branded. And then consideration, are you helping educate your audience? Once they've now heard of you, what factors and questions and problems are you helping them weigh so that they understand what they need to make that decision and what's the right solution for them? And so on and so forth. Between decision and advocacy, this helps you understand what stages you need to prioritize and focus on so that you're not having those gaps that Sophia fell into earlier during her journey. She knows that each stage of the way, you have the content that's going to address her needs, so she doesn't need to go find it somewhere else. And honestly, the more you talk about even if it's one specific topic or a few very similarly related ones, don't feel like you're talking too much about any given topic, because let's face it, a rising tide lifts all boats. Google loves to see you as an authoritative figure on a given topic. So the more you talk about it in unique ways, it's going to raise the visibility and authority of all of your content. So keep talking about your industry, keep talking about these topics. And the more you have in your arsenal, the better Google is going to like it, the more your audience is going to like it, and the more you have in your tool belt to pull from, and make sure that you're targeting your audience at each stage of their journey. So create that content at each stage and have everything that you need. All right, I know that was a whirlwind of information. We went from start to finish on why it's important to own your audience, how you can do that throughout a customer journey, and how important it is to have the right content to address and meet the needs of your audience at each stage of their way. So I really appreciate your time today. I hope you learned a lot about the customer journey and how we approach it from a digital marketing standpoint. And so if we have enough time, Brad, let me know if we have time for any questions. I know we went pretty close to the mark today.
We do. I think we have time for a few questions. And thanks again, Blake, for jumping on with us. The customer journey, obviously, as you covered, has a bunch of different names. It's not necessarily anything new, but the way that it's being used online has changed. And what we're really trying to teach this year for our audience is that the value of that owned audience. And one example that we always use is the Dollar Shave Club example. And I'm sure our listeners right now have seen the Dollar Shave Club viral video where he kind of walks through his warehouse. It's a $1 per razor, and it kind of blew everyone away 5 years ago. They recently sold their company for $1 billion with a B, like Brad and Blake. And what we say is that it's not because their razors were so great. It's because they strategized around building that owned audience and built a database or a contact list so large that they sold it to this company for $1 billion because they ended up, the company that bought them sold similar male products, and they wanted that owned audience so that they could reach them at the time and place of their choosing. So there's a few ways that you can leverage that owned audience, but what we're finding is that if you can get them to that tier one owned audience, that's going to be what's most valuable for your organization. So before we move into the questions, I just want to remind everybody that we will be sending out the recording of this webinar and the slides to everyone early tomorrow AM. So let's jump right in, and I can help you answer this one. It's not necessarily a question. It comes from Graciela, and she says, I need to deactivate an old subscriber list or just have to convince my boss to allow me to clean it up. And what I think she's talking about is she's built a contact list. Maybe she's using a hub and spoke model, but they're not engaging with her email or her content or newsletter. And is it worth keeping those contacts in her database or cutting the ugly ducklings, as we say? And so I would like to use an example from Blake and I's book where we talk about cleaning up your owned audience list. And when I was living in Nashville, my wife and I would go to this winery, and we don't necessarily drink wine often, but we went to this winery and we signed up for a newsletter. And for 4 years, they were trying to get us to buy cases of wine. And for 4 years, we never opened an email and never bought anything. And what they should be doing is cutting my wife and I out of their newsletter because clearly we didn't have interest in their product. And if anything, it's going to negatively impact their email campaigns because we're not opening their emails, we're not clicking through to their content. So to answer Graciela's question, and how do you can convince your boss, I think it will do you more harm to leave those unengaged contacts in your database rather than cutting those ugly ducklings and moving forward with a hub and spoke model and re-engaging with a more targeted audience that'll be more valuable for you. So I hope I answered that for you, Graciela. Blake, we just got a question in just now, so I'm gonna dive into that one. Let me open it here. So this one comes from Jeff, and he asks, what if your target audience is very small, like hundreds and not tens or hundreds of thousands of people? How do you address this and maximize the content effort?
Yeah, that's a great question. Brad, do you mind if I start off with this one?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were going to talk. Yeah, and that's what we get all of the time is I guess maximizing your content effort. Don't think of it as I'm trying to still reach thousands of people with this content. That's fine if you have a small niche audience, but focus those efforts to what they're specifically encountering and what they're dealing with in their day-to-day and how they interact with you. Whether you're B2B or B2C, they still have questions and they still have problems and needs to be met. And so really like gauge and center your content around that. So maybe you don't need to produce, hundreds of blog posts because it's such without knowing your industry or what they're dealing with, it's something to just make sure that you're being effective with your strategy and providing the right information in where and how they want to consume it. I know sometimes I've worked with companies that say, well, we only work with, we only have, 20 clients a year. And so they're not someone who's going to go through a lot of transactions and gain a lot of new customers every single day, and that's fine. So from there, you're just trying to put your content in front of where those very, very few specific people are spending their time and how they want to consume that information. That's really where I would understand and think about, is that they're a person at the end of the day as well. And are you providing the information in the time and place and manner that they want to consume it? I don't know, Brad, if you have any other thoughts as well.
No, I agree with your thoughts. I also think that people get hung up on their audience size, and depending on your
Yeah.
industry or your business, it doesn't mean that that's less valuable. So if we were doing topic ideation and we were looking at 30,000 people search for, I always use the example of hiking boots, right? Let's say 30,000 people a month search for hiking boots, and that's a large search volume. But maybe in your industry, it's so niche that maybe you're only getting about 10 or 15 searches a month related to your content. Well, if those 10 or 15 people are high quality leads or people really interested in your service, I would say that that's equally or if not more valuable than 30,000 people who might not ever have any interest in your product anyway. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that smaller audience size. It's really just about understanding your personas, and like Blake has been preaching, crafting content for each stage of their journey.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brad. And something that I just dealt with this week is sometimes companies get too hung up on keyword volume and search volume and that kind of thing. And I tell them at the end of the day, every single time, I would rather have 10 qualified leads come from this one piece of content than 1,000 non-qualified leads. So don't let that search volume of non-qualified people influence your decision making. I'd rather get 5 qualified leads in my door every day than 10,000 non-qualified leads or traffic that's not looking for that specific product or service. So that's really how I would look at it as well.
So our next question comes from Hope, and she asks, do you have any suggestion for a company that doesn't sell a tangible product, consulting, for example? And this, I can kind of jump in first and just, we really try to emphasize the fact that the customer journey and owning an audience relates to any industry. It doesn't matter if you're selling backhoes, you're a career advice professional. People are turning to Google. They're using Google to research and educate themselves, and they're using Google to find content to educate themselves. So if you are a consultant and you're just a one-man team, and you're trying to connect with that audience, the rules don't really change. You still need to answer their most common questions. You need to be that authoritative resource for them, and you need to eliminate as many content gaps as you can, because you're not the only consultant out there. And if there is a gap in your journey and people are looking for information and you aren't there for them, they're going to continue that journey without you.
Yeah. I would also add to that yeah, that's perfectly spot on. I would also say is understanding too who your audience is and what they have before they decide to reach out to a consulting company for the first time. Like, why did they do that to begin with? What problems and issues or questions would motivate them to then reach out to a consulting company and write content about those awareness level needs to get them, coming into your funnel and get them understanding what you're talking about and what you have to offer. So I would kind of start there, like start a step before they even get to you. What are they going through and creating content around that?
So we have time for two more questions here. This one comes from Christy, and she asks, have you ever used a cold email campaign with a lead gen form through a third party to grow your own audience? And I'm the director of marketing at Vertical Measures, so I can answer this one and say no. One, because we just didn't want to spend money on something that we knew we could accumulate ourselves. If you have a budget for it, and certainly if you're a larger corporation and you feel like you can use a third party to generate even more leads, my recommendation would be to not fix what's not broken. If it's returning an ROI for you, then that's great. But I do want to make a point that you can 100% build an owned audience without the help of a third-party vendor. And it does take planning and resources, but using these principles outlined, one in Blake's book and in this webinar, you should be able to build that owned audience for yourself. So the last question comes from Aaron, and this is more of a fun one, I think. He's asking Blake, do I already own my audience? So Blake, why don't you, for the last couple minutes, go over the 3 tiers again with him, and let's ask him, does he own or rent his audience?
That's a good one. Yeah, exactly. That would be my question is how many people do you have coming to your website and fall into that tier 3? How many social media followers and those types of avenues do you have people following you there? And then funnel that down and see what is maybe the amount of people that you actually have their phone number, their email, their direct contact information to reach out to. And that's really the question is how many of those people do you have? Because that's truly your owned audience. And so that the thing too that is kind of in tandem with this question is, do I own my audience or who is my audience? The funny thing we like to say is you already know. Like you can go into Google Analytics and see what types of people are coming to your website. You can go to your social media channels and identify what types of people are coming there, and then use that to guide and drive your strategy moving forward to accumulate more of those types of people and understand their needs. So yeah, do you own your audience? If you have a lot of email addresses, a lot of phone numbers and names and direct contact info, then my short answer would be yes.
All right, thank you, Blake. That's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you again, Blake, for presenting a great webinar. We're really excited for next month's webinar with our senior marketing consultant, John Triplett. You might have seen him. He's going on tour with digital summits all across the country, so we're really excited to have him. Registration will begin in early May and will continue out throughout the rest of the month. Until then, I'm Brad Ken from Vertical Measures, a Investus digital company. Oh man, that sounds so good. And go Cardinals. Thanks, Blake.